Morning, this is the Ancient and Medieval History Lecture for Monday, June 6th, 2022. First off, textbooks. I want them tomorrow. So bring them in, and I will sign them in. This counts as a homework assignment, which is an easy A. Turn them in on time, turn them in tomorrow, take your covers off, and if it's not in tomorrow, it will not be an A, but you'll get a passing grade once it is turned in. Yes?
If I turn it in today, can I get extra credit?
No, because I'm not ready to take it today. In fact, if you want to talk about unreadiness, see how I normally have my notes up? Yeah. So this morning was a little bit busy. The second thing, I thought I had printed this out just now. I did. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade towards which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessings of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. This message was from General Dwight David Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, Allied Forces in Europe. It was given to the men as they were preparing to hit the beach in France for the Allied landings called Operation Overlord, or more commonly the D-Day invasions of Normandy, June 6, 1944. Many of the men who heard this message were just slightly older than you. Many of them would not get older. The Germans had taken over all of Europe, from the Atlantic Ocean to the hearts of European Russia. And while the Russians had turned the tide in the east in Stalingrad a year and a half earlier, and while the struggle against Japan had also begun to turn, it was unclear whether these English-speaking peoples would be able to land on the shores of Europe and not get slaughtered. As it was, there were two messages that Eisenhower prepared. The first was in the event that we were thrown off the beaches. In other words, a defeat, where he took personal responsibility for it. The second was in the event of victory. At 4 of the 5 beaches, we fought our way ashore and inland. At Omaha Beach, where there was a 200-foot cliff right by the beach, it was harder. And there was a lot of blood lost, American blood. But people just like you, slightly older than most of you, chose to put on a uniform and go into harm's way. in order to preserve freedom. In a world where people are on their parents' life insurance until age 26, and where each of us probably personally know people who are still living in their parents' basement 10 years or more after graduating high school, it's important to understand that we are abnormal. What's normal is for young people to become adult. And the way you become an adult is to take on adult responsibilities. The responsibilities that those men shouldered is beyond adult. But in doing so, they saved the world. So, on this anniversary of June 6, 1944, I suggest this for you to think about. Any questions, comments, or thoughts before we go into today's lesson on the late Middle Ages? By the way, the men who did that were under a 3-term Democratic president who was about to win his 4th term. That isn't a political message. That message is for all Americans of all parties, because all Americans of all parties took part in that war and that invasion. I apologize for not having things up on the board this morning. I was distracted by things. So, we had talked about England and its history during the 100 Years' War and the Black Death. Now, the French, we are on item F, problems with the French monarchy. The French monarchy is of the House of Valois, and they have a series of weak kings, but one very strong queen. Her name is Catherine de' Medici. And Catherine de' Medici ends up setting the tone for the late medieval French monarchy. She ends up influencing, aka making policy for several weak male relatives, husbands, sons, so forth. She is the sponsor for the famous prophet Nostradamus. About to say Nosferatu. Does anyone know what the word Nosferatu means?
Well, I know what Nosferatu means.
What is it?
It's like a...
Yeah, it's a Romanian word for vampire. Nostradamus is slightly different from Nosferatu. Nostradamus, do any of you know who he is or what he did? Sir?
He was a soothsayer.
And do you recall how he said his sooths?
I don't remember how I said it.
He did so in poetical terms called quatrains, which were a series of 4 lines, or basically rhymed meter, where he pictured the future. Do you remember anything about him?
Not much, no.
Okay. Nostradamus is a favorite of lovers of the occult and of secret societies and things like that, because, like every good prophet, he doesn't speak plainly. He's like the oracle at Delphi back in Greek times. The oracle at Delphi never spoke plainly. She always spoke in riddles. And the thing about being a good prophet is if you speak in riddles, after the fact, you can probably find a way to twist reality to suit the words that you had previously spoken. But Nostradamus is famous for predicting the rise of 3 separate antichrists. And he spoke in detail enough that many of those who believe in his prophetic vision say that he talked specifically about Napoleon Bonaparte as the first Antichrist, Adolf Hitler as the second Antichrist, and a third Antichrist to arise in the Middle East, who will wear an imperial turban and who will march on Europe and conquer it. The first 2 have come. The third is yet to reveal itself if you believe in this sort of thing. But then, like the Bible, he predicts a happy ending. He talks about 1,000 years of peace after the defeat of the 3 antichrists. In any event, the reason I mention him, Catherine de' Medici is his sponsor.
Why is Napoleon an antichrist? What did he do that?
He conquered Europe. From Portugal to Moscow.
I'll be honest, I don't even really.
Yeah, because you didn't take my European history
I will
course.
next year.
Okay, then you'll learn.
Yeah.
You'll learn about the little Corsican general.
But I didn't think that he had done anything.
No, what it is world conqueror, and the replacement with a human power instead of the power of God. That's the idea. And Napoleon was enough of a cult of personality type egomaniac to qualify, at least by Nostradamus' terms. But then again, Nostradamus may have just enjoyed drinking and writing at the same time. In any event, France, after the 100 Years' War, tends to drift, and ultimately the House of Valois is going to be replaced by the House of Bourbon, and we'll set it up for modern times with a drifting French monarchy going from dynasty to dynasty. Holy Roman Empire! Also is fairly status quo during the late Middle Ages. The Holy Roman Empire continues to be a basket case where the elected emperor has little power, and the various noblemen who make up his empire do largely what they want. But the Peace of Westphalia, remember, well, no, we haven't gotten there. But largely, the Holy Roman Empire becomes more and more concerned with a threat to their southeast. Here is the Holy Roman Empire in the heart of Europe. And as we approach the end of medieval times, this region becomes more and more under the thrall of the Ottoman Turks, an Islamic empire that is more powerful than any of the single European nations. It's heading towards 1453, when the Ottoman Turks will conquer Constantinople. And after conquering Constantinople and destroying the Byzantine Empire once and for all, the Ottoman Turks will then drive towards the heart of Europe, its chief enemy being the Holy Roman Empire. We're doing a lot of summarizing today. This is also the time of the rise of the greatest supernation you've never heard of. Poland-Lithuania is the major Eastern European power in the late Middle Ages and early modern times. Now, today, Lithuania is a tiny little Baltic country that's lucky to be independent. It has been under Russian rule for the most part for the last few hundred years. Scary under Russian rule. Now, Poland has a different problem. Where is Poland? Most people would say it's east of Germany and west of Russia. Can you see a problem with being in that neighborhood? Between Germany and Russia? But in the late Middle Ages, Poland joins with Lithuania, and Poland dominates the area in the east of Germany. What we today call Poland, White Russia, the Baltic states, Ukraine, and even into Russia itself. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth ends up controlling land roughly from here to about here. Doesn't quite reach the Black Sea. That's a pretty big area. How do they do it? Well, the first thing you should know about Poland-Lithuania, and you should write this down, is religious toleration. The Lithuanians have pagan tendencies. In fact, Lithuania remains pagan throughout most of the Middle Ages. The only reason it doesn't get a crusade levied against it like the Prussians did is because the Lithuanians ally with the Polish monarchy. They convert to Christianity, but they do so more slowly than almost anyone else. And perhaps it's because of this willingness to tolerate pagans that the Poles do not insist on a particularly strong unifying religious dogma. Poland, Lithuania, being open to religion is going to make it a haven for Jews, for unorthodox Christians, and as long as you are loyal to the government of the Commonwealth, The government of the Commonwealth will preserve a degree of liberty. I'll say that again, liberty. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth has a variety of classes of people that vote in a parliament that actually has some power. This is the late Middle Ages, and it's not England. It is the freest place outside of England, and arguably, because of its religious toleration, there are things in Poland, Lithuania that are more free, more liberty-oriented than what is going on in England. So, Golubiewski, you should be proud of your heritage, which comes from Poland, Lithuania. Unfortunately for it, when Germany and Russia wake up, they're going to be hungry. Nibble, 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 chomp. And that is going to be the future of Poland, Lithuania. Medieval Russia. Why are we using the term Russia? We talked about this the last time we covered that. What is it about the people who settled the rivers of Russia that has to do with the name Russia or Rus? Any of you at all remember what Rus means?
Right here.
No. Good guess, though. I could see that guess. Rus. It is a color, though. Yeah. Yes! Blue is the color that wards off evil. That's why boys wear blue. Girls wear pink because it looks good with blue. But that's the spirit then. The blue eyes of the Vikings that take over much of the rivers of this region during the middle and late Viking period give the name Rus to the Kievan country and later to Russia itself. So there's this Viking heritage, but the Vikings get conquered by the Mongols. And the Mongols, or Tatars, not Tatars, the Tatars end up ruling Russia for between 200 and 350 years, depending upon where you're talking about. We also talked about this. What quality do the Mongols pass on to the Russians? There is a personality quirk, if you will, or a quality, an emotional cultural value that the Mongols have. I know you know. George?
Tater aggression.
Yes, exactly right. Tater aggression. You're going to see. Keep calling them taters! Tartars. Who are you? I'm a tater. Tatar aggression. In other words, a tendency towards brutalism. A tendency towards brutality. Because if you mess with the Mongols, your city will be erased from the map. Your people will be slaughtered. Those who survive will be brainwashed, brutalized slaves. And what the Russians get from this is strength is good. Weakness is the only unforgivable sin. And to this day, Russian government has this tendency towards genuine cruelty and viciousness that the Russians seem to admire, even as the rest of Europe goes, Not that you'd see that in current events today. Putin. But eventually, the Mongol power wanes. That is, reduces. And what we begin to see is a new power rising in the east, around about, say, here, somewhere. Muscovy. The Grand Duchy of Muscovy. Muscovy is centered on what city, Isaac? Muscovy. Russian city. Begins with M. Yes. I know you knew that. Moscow. We are happy. So, the Grand Duke of Muscovy, or the Grand Duke of Moscow, breaks away from the Mongols and begins to establish his own country here deep in the heart of Russia. Now, of the early rulers of Muscovy, there is a man that is going to loom over their history, Ivan Grozny. In America, what?
I thought you were going to say Rasputin.
No, he's later. Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Terrible in Americanese English. Now, why do you think they call him the Terrible? Only when they deserve. Actually, no. He had relatives of his killed when they were children because he wanted to. That was enough. He's the king, he's the Grand Duke or the King, the Tsar, and he wants to. So, we are building towards a ruler that is so vicious and brutal that in Russia, where vicious and brutal rulers are called the Great, he is the only one called the Terrible. Why? Because in Muscovy there is one will to rule them all, one will to find them, one will to bring them all, and in the darkness find them. And that will is the will of the ruler, the Grand Duke, and later Tsar. And the word Tsar comes from the Russian pronunciation of who's that Roman?
Caesar.
Caesar, yes.
Did I have a terrible drink mercury? Like something to do with mercury?
There's a vague legend, it sounds right.
It's like, I think like later in his life,
Went a little crazy.
aches and pains.
Yeah.
Like, so someone said, "Oh yeah, drink like 8 ounces of mercury a day."
Yeah, that'll be good for you.
And then he, like, well, yeah, a lot of powerful rulers did that, but like he specifically like started doing it.
Yeah, because it's liquid metal. Do you understand how commoners think metal is solid? But somebody of Ivan's preeminence, he knows that there's a liquid metal. And if there's a liquid metal, why not drink it? It's magical. It makes total sense. I say we go towards him because we haven't quite reached it. But the seeds of Poland-Lithuania's doom are sown in Muscovy in the east. And they're going to be sown in the Holy Roman Empire as it gets its act together in the west. I've already shown you the film clip from Alexander Nevsky, that black and white Soviet-era music video showing the Teutonic Knights charging across the frozen lake and the heroic Russian people fighting them.
She shows again.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
But I won't because we don't have time. Now we come to it. Okay. There are diseases that you may have heard at some point might affect society. I'm sure you have no personal experience with this, but sometimes diseases become so prominent that they are called epidemics, which means they spread quickly and dangerously. And then there are the rare diseases, which are like super epidemics, but we don't call them super epidemics. That would be uncouth. We call them pandemics, because a pandemic is universally epidemic. Now, while it is certainly possible that a Chinese bioresearch lab experimenting with coronaviruses and bats might accidentally release a disease into the general population that might spread worldwide because the Chinese Communist Party lived in Egypt, the land of the Nile, for the first few months, and encouraged, actually, they didn't just allow, they encouraged more international flights from the city of Wuhan before the pandemic was noticed, recognized, and announced. Not that that would ever happen to cause a global pandemic that might affect society, people's income, people's lifestyles, or anything else. Remember those lovely things you had to wear? Yeah. Slightly affecting your lives. There are two basic qualities of disease. And if a disease has both of these qualities, it certainly has the ability to affect history. One of the qualities of a disease is communicability. Communicability is how easy is it to catch a disease from somebody else? How communicable is it? So the common cold is highly communicable. If it's cold and flu season and I sneeze or cough, and I happen to have the common cold, there it is, flying around the room. And suddenly Chauncey has it. Yes. But before he realizes it, he coughs or sneezes in another environment. Achoo! And they get it. And so on and so on and so forth. Catching the common cold is incredibly easy. Luckily, the common cold is not particularly lethal. Lethality is the other quality that diseases have. So communicability, how easy is it to catch? And lethality, how likely are you to die? Now, here's a disease that has a high lethality, or used to anyway, the AIDS virus. The AIDS virus, or HIV, human immune deficiency virus, will take a person's immune system, make them do the work, and turn it basically to putty. So, you know the immunities you have against infection and low-grade diseases and colds and things like that? There it goes. Bye-bye. And without an immune system, you're just going to die.
Yes, I know.
So, how is it that we have not all been wiped out by AIDS? Because while the common cold is highly communicable, not very lethal, AIDS, highly lethal, not very communicable. The way you catch AIDS is a very delicate virus. It is a snowflake of viruses, a special little snowflake. If you have warm body fluids that are undisturbed by much, not too hot, not too cold, not too dry, that warm, wet body fluid can pass on an intact HIV virus and give you AIDS, in which case your life will change. Now, today we do have drugs that help prevent it, or not prevent it, that help mitigate it, but it's still really nasty. You don't want to get it. But fluids don't last long. For example, if you cough and some of your sputum, that's your phlegm, ends up on the table in a little dome of liquid. And there's a HIV virus inside. Is somebody else likely to catch it? Well, if they have an open wound and they slam down on that little drop of spittle and the virus goes, yeah, they're going to catch it. But for the most part, HIV is transmitted sexually. Or if I go like lick on my finger and then stick it in your eye, which I'm not going to do because that's disgusting. You know how cultures have different, customs for affection? Like Eskimos rub their noses and stuff because it's cold. And if they were to lip lock on one another, it would hurt because it's so cold. You'd end up with freezing liquid. So they rub noses. Nobody licks their finger and sticks it in each other's eye. Nobody. But if that were to be a custom, then you could transmit AIDS. In other words, catching AIDS is much more difficult. If you catch it, you're in trouble. But if it's not so easy to catch, unless you have unprotected sex or if you're just swapping bodily fluids. That's what, when I was a kid back in the Stone Age, we had dinosaurs, but we also had something called blood brothers. Blood brothers is, okay, you're pals with somebody. You've been through it, so you each slice open a little bit of your hand and you go swang.
There's so many nerve endings in the palm of your hand. Why don't you cut up up here or something?
Because no, boys aren't going to do that. You got to be tough. Yeah, it hurts. Yeah, blood brother. Ah. Apparently, these days they have something that's still not great. What's the replacement for blood brothers? Do any of you know?
Pinky promise.
No, that's not it. There's no fluid. Spit brothers.
Ew.
Yeah. You go platoon and then yeah. His boys. They're gross. They're gruesome.
Until people go for the aorta.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Makes sense.
That's the way the people of Masada
Go
did
right
it.
there.
Oh, they suicided at Masada by slicing their own major veins open in their neck. Happy knowledge.
Yes.
Okay. The Bubonic Plague is the likeliest culprit for what Europeans call the Black Death. And the thing about the Bubonic Plague, the thing you really need to understand is it's highly communicable. Very easy to give somebody Bubonic Plague. And it's highly lethal. If you catch it, you're probably going to die. Even, yes,
There's this great song from Something Rotten called The Black Death. That'd be a great introduction to the Black Death.
okay, well, I will look for it. I'm going to pause that because, God forbid, I get a copyright strike from you. Oh, by the way, YouTube, I've got to say this to all of my classes. Last week, I had the culmination of my Holocaust lessons, which is what I've been building to all year in European history. The slaughter of the Jews by the Nazis using Zyklon B gas. And YouTube gave me a hate speech strike, which I appealed and they rejected. Because apparently teaching about the Holocaust is hate speech to you commie jerks at YouTube. So, that was the Black Death song from Something Rotten. And a clip from the Fritz Lang silent movie masterpiece, Metropolis, showing death personified as the Grim Reaper. What is the Black Death? Well, it's a cocktail of various related diseases, but the heart of which is Bubonic Plague. Now, it starts in the east somewhere in Asia, but it does spread using the Silk Road from the east in Asia to the Middle East, Western Asia. And a ship from the Middle East lands in North Italy, like we talked about with the trade routes. And coming off of this ship are rats. Ships in this day, just as today, if you're not really, really careful, always carry rats. In those days, ships are made of wood, nibble, 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 scratch, 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 and they keep all of their stores in either bags or wooden casks or wooden chests, which are not entirely rat-proof, since rats can actually dig through concrete if they want to, if you give them enough time. A lot of people think that octopi will be the next intelligent life form on Earth because cephalopods have this incredible brain, and they do. And if we mess up things, it's possible that they will survive and develop intelligence. But even though whales are intelligent and dolphins are intelligent and dogs are somewhat intelligent, so are cats. Nah, not really. Pigs are intelligent. Crows and ravens are very intelligent. Rats are not only somewhat intelligent, but they're incredibly opportunistic. In any way, when a ship is at dock, rats will jump into the water, and they'll often climb up their anchor chain and get into the ship, and then they'll inhabit the ship, and they'll breed, and there'll be more and more, and you've got to kill them, so forth. They're vermin. Now, the rats come ashore, and there's an exchange of rats. Some rats go onto the ship, some rats go ashore. There's rat congress, there's rat conversation, there's rat sex, there's all sorts of ratty things going on. But aboard these rats are little tiny parasitical bugs. And these little tiny parasitical bugs jump from one rat to another, or to other warm, hairy animals. And it is these parasitical little bugs that carry the Black Death. So, now you have a late medieval European city. They're clean, right? We talked about how clean they were. What are some of the clean things about medieval cities?
Streets.
Yep. Streets that are so filled with human and animal waste that it takes heavy rains to wash them away. And that's just the streets.
You do the pooper shove
Yeah.
out the window.
Yeah, you have your chamber pots, and if you're kind, you say, look out below, slosh. And if you're not kind, you just do it. This is why gentlemen walk on the outside of ladies when it comes to your building. So there's the lady, and there's the guy, because if slosh is going to hit someone, better to be us than to the ladies. What the gentleman says. In these pest holes of filth, rats thrive. There are more rats in any human city than there are people. This is still true. So, the rats spread, and the pests spread, and the disease spreads. Ring around. Wait, how does it go? I'm forgetting the tune. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. It's the song of the Black Death. Ring around the rosy. The first symptoms are the splotches on a person's body that form into pustules called buboes or buboes. These buboes give the name bubonic plague. What they are super fat, super full, like super yicky pimples. And they burst, and you get all sorts of yick. And they appear in bunches. It's like catching rust. But instead of it being rust on steel or iron, it's these buboes appearing all over your body. And so ring around the rosy is what a bubo would look like. You've got the pustule thing, and you've got sort of a ring around it. Pocket full of posies. Posies, like most flowers, smell. And if you smell the posies and breathe in through the posies, the smell, the ever-present smell, the ubiquitous smell of death might be something you can handle. Ashes, ashes. Christians believe in the resurrection of the body, which modern theologians would say that your soul as an individual being is eternal, living in relation to God. But in the Middle Ages, they take this literally, and that's why Christians tend to bury their dead rather than cremate them. If you bury the dead, you are leaving it open for God to actually reanimate the body and give it life again, and so on and so forth. That's why. But when you have times of megadeath, like the Black Plague, you are going to find it impossible to do proper burials for everyone. So you stop digging graves for people and burying them individually. Either you take them outside of the city and drop them in a trench and pour lye on them. Lye is powdered acid, burns through the body quickly. Or you burn the bodies outside the city. And so many people are catching this disease, there is no way that the dead are going to be buried normally. So, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Everybody dies. The disease usually takes a week to 2 to play through. In that last week or 2, you are bedridden, you rave, you've got cold sweats, meaning your body is running a fever, but you feel cold. The buboes appear all over you, they ooze. Then you get black spots on your skin because you have lots of blood pooling inside. And then you die. In some places in England, entire counties were depopulated to the point where there were 2 or 3 people left in the entire county. Poland, Lithuania, oddly, is spared. Russia's hit to the east, Scandinavia's hit to the north, Germany's hit to the west, Romania and Hungary are hit to the south, but Poland, Lithuania, for whatever reason, has a fairly low death rate. During the height of the Black Death, people would set up patrols on the edge of their village, where the roads come in, and anyone who approached the village who was a stranger would be warned off, and if they refused to stop, they'd be shot dead with a crossbow or a longbow, because nobody wants to catch this disease. The only way to keep from catching this disease is to completely isolate yourself. Some of the COVID measures that we took because of a disease that has a much lower lethality than any other serious pandemic. 100 years ago, we had the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu was highly communicable and highly lethal. A lot of people died, including my great-grandmother. More Americans died of the Spanish flu than during World War I. COVID is not nearly that lethal. But we went into a form of social isolation during the first months in 2020 that we had never done before, not with Spanish flu, not with anything. And I think the fear was that because this is a genetically engineered virus, that it will be unusually hard to fight. I think that that's what convinced President Trump and other people to close down the economy, which is a fairly unprecedented thing to do. Because if you're not going to work, and if you're staying mostly in isolation, you're not going to be able to catch the disease or pass it on. Now, I don't think that made sense for COVID, but that's my personal opinion. You are welcome to disagree with that and every other silly opinion I have. But in the time of the Black Death, that's what villages would do. They said, nobody here has it. Nobody here has gotten it. We're not letting anyone out or in. We're not under any circumstances. No one new is going to be allowed in here. But I've got my fiance. No one new is going to be allowed in here. But my husband's away and I have a small child. No one new is allowed in here. And they completely isolated. Imagine Kootenai County with 5 or 6 people left alive. So we're talking levels of death that are unprecedented in European history. We're talking levels of death that are beyond anything we've seen so far in war. If we had a global thermonuclear war, that would at least be as bad. But short of something like that, or the release of a genuinely dangerous supergerm, you don't see 33 to 66% of your population die. And again, it's uneven. Some places have almost total death. Other places, like Poland, not so much at all. But that little childhood rhyme is typical of children's stories. In America, Disney has sanitized children's stories, as well as destroying Star Wars. Jerks! But they have sanitized children's stories in order to give everyone happy endings. That's not the point of children's stories in Europe or in Asia. In these older societies, you know what children's stories are for?
Children scaring you.
Yes. They're there to remind you, to teach you about life. Not happy, fun time, rainbow unicorn life, but death. In Europe and in Asia, by the time you reached your age, you'd be adults, and you would have encountered death several times. Personally, you would have found dead bodies, you would have gone to open casket funerals, you would have dealt with death. Also, you would have probably been slaughtering animals and been around animals that were being slaughtered since you were a kid. So the realities of life and death, which most of us are shielded from, we get meat in the cellophane wrapper in the supermarket. We don't take Joe the chicken and stretch his neck out and swacko knock his neck off.
I have
Joe the chicken. What?
My aunt has a farm, so me and my brothers went up last summer. And
Okay. So you know what it's like.
They breed a lot of insects.
They do. But they're tasty. So.
I've been slaughtering chickens and rabbits since I could hold shit.
Tough guy.
Not the chickens!
When the ghosts of all those chickens and rabbits come back to haunt you.
Kill the chickens!
Yeah, no, that's part of life. What you guys have done is part of life. Our life, for us to live, there's a reason vampire stories are ubiquitous. For us to live, we need to kill. And for those of you who are vegans, well, good for you. You're better people than I am, but that does make you lower on the food chain. But what if plants also have a variant of special life? What if grass can, in fact, feel pain? Then you vegans are also engaged in doing something that has a degree of cruelty. Poor little broccoli is just growing there, eating sunlight and drinking water and soaking up the nutrients from the soil. And then slack, nom, nom, nom. I'm better than meat eaters. Well, yeah, but you're still eating, Bob the broccoli.
Oh, never mind. It was...
Okay.
Yeah.
In any event, next time I will show you a few other visual representations because, ladies, gentlemen, when you have so many people getting sick around you and dying around you, your art is going to reflect this. And the art of Europe during the time and after the time of the Black Death is absolutely obsessed with death. So we're going to see a couple of things that are rooted in that. Sorry I didn't have the stuff up on the board. Any questions, comments, or thoughts? Then we will continue with the Black Death tomorrow. Thank you. Come again. Remember, textbooks tomorrow.
Yes.